There is a parking lot in Albuquerque, New Mexico, just off Unser Boulevard, where families pull in on weekend mornings and read laminated trail maps before walking out into the desert. The lot is paved. There are restroom facilities. A posted fee schedule explains that annual passes are accepted. Children run ahead on the path while parents apply sunscreen and check the time on their phones. The basalt escarpment that edges the western horizon is dark and old, and it catches the light in a particular way in the late afternoon that makes it look almost purple against the sky. This is Petroglyph National Monument. It is one of the largest petroglyph sites in North America, approximately 17 miles of volcanic basalt along the West Mesa, and it receives close to 200,000 visitors each year. The National Park Service manages it jointly with the city of Albuquerque. There are 3 main trail systems. Most of them are rated easy. The shortest takes under an hour to walk. The images carved into the black rock here number somewhere between 24,000 and as many as 26,000 individual figures, depending on how you count. Some are of animals, some are of human-like forms. Some are geometric. Many are old enough that no written record exists of when they were made or by whom. Precisely, though the Pueblo peoples of the Rio Grande Valley have maintained a continuous relationship with this land and these markings for generations. Uncountable. The rangers who staff the monument are knowledgeable and professional. They will tell you about the ancestral Pueblo and Tiwa-speaking peoples who created many of these images. They will tell you about the volcanic activity that produced the basalt. They will tell you that the petroglyphs are protected under federal law, that touching them causes irreversible damage, and that photography is permitted. There is something the rangers do not tell you. The Pueblo elders who still hold ceremonial authority over this site, and several Pueblo nations hold that authority, recognized in writing by the federal government, have stated something specific about certain images here. Not all of them. Certain ones, they have stated that these images are not records. They are not art in the sense you mean when you use that word. They are not expressions or stories left behind or religious decoration. They are locks. What that word means, what the elders mean when they use that language, requires some explanation. And that explanation begins not here, in Albuquerque, in a parking lot with a fee schedule, but with what the Tiwa-speaking peoples of this region understood about the relationship between image and location, between the act of marking stone and the act of sealing something in place. Their position, passed through generations, is not that these images are sacred in a general way that calls for reverence. Their position is functionally specific. A defined class of markings in defined locations does a defined thing. It closes something. It keeps something separate from the world you walk through. The question worth sitting with before we go any further is this: why would a warning be that precise? General reverence does not require specificity. A people who simply wanted to protect a sacred location from outsiders would say, "Do not enter. Do not touch, this is holy ground." Cultures around the world have said exactly that for as long as cultures have existed. The Tiwa-speaking elders at Petroglyph National Monument do not say that. They say something more particular. Certain symbols mark places where something was sealed. The act of tracing one of those symbols with your finger is not disrespectful. It is not rude. It is not offensive in a cultural sense that a thoughtful visitor might accidentally commit. It is, in their understanding, a mechanism. It is the action that opens what was closed. They were specific because specificity was required. Not because of tradition, not because the warning had to be memorized and passed down accurately, though that may also be true, but because the thing they were warning about, the thing those markings seal, is specific. It responds to specific actions. And if you perform those actions, something specific results. The rangers do not say this on the trail. The laminated maps do not mention it. The fee schedule at the parking lot certainly does not include it. But the elders have said it clearly. More than once, to more than one researcher, cultural liaison, and federal representative. It is in the record if you know where to look. The case that closes this documentary, a case that the National Park Service received a formal report about and has never publicly addressed, is the reason you should stay with what comes next. 9 Mile Canyon sits in the Petroglyphs region of eastern Utah, in Carbon and Duchesne counties, approximately 30 miles south of the town of Price. It stretches for approximately 40 miles through the canyon country, and it holds the largest known concentration of rock art in North America, more than 10,000 individual images carved or painted across the canyon walls over several thousand years. Scholars have called it the world's longest art gallery. The comparison is not inaccurate. You can drive the canyon road in a vehicle and stop at marked pullouts to view panel after panel through binoculars or on foot. The images here were made primarily by the Fremont people, a culture that occupied this region from roughly 600 to 1300 CE. The Ute and Paiute peoples who came after them, and who remain in this region today, did not make these images, but they have a detailed oral relationship with them. They know what many of the panels mean. They know what was intended by certain configurations of figures and symbols. And they have said something specific about a class of panel that appears at intervals throughout the canyon. These panels are described by Ute cultural knowledge keepers as watching places. The term requires explanation in context. The watching the elders describe is not passive. It is not the way a painting in a museum watches a room, a metaphor for presence, for intensity of composition. The watching places in 9 Mile Canyon were identified as such because of the orientation of the figures within the panel. They face outward, not toward the canyon wall, not toward the canyon floor. Outward, away from the rock, away from the internal space of the panel. This distinction, inward-facing versus outward-facing, is not a minor stylistic observation. It is the entire point of the designation. The elder's position is that images made to be seen by human visitors face the visitor. Images made for another purpose face something else. The Ute explanation is not that these panels are looking at the landscape for aesthetic reasons, or that the artists face their figures outward by coincidence or convention. The explanation is that these panels were not made to be seen by humans at all. They were made to face something that approaches from outside. They are not records of observation. They are the observation itself, ongoing. What happens near these panels, what has been reported near these panels in recent documented history, does not come from oral tradition. Alone in 2019, a Carbon County search and rescue log recorded a response call to 9 Mile Canyon after 3 members of a hiking party reported becoming disoriented within a short distance of one of the primary panel clusters. The disorientation was not attributed to heat, dehydration, or altitude. The 3 individuals reported, consistently and independently, that they could not account for a period of several hours. They were found in the morning. They had not traveled far from where they made camp, though none of them had any memory of the night passing. The search and rescue report notes the location precisely. That location is within 40 meters of one of the canyon's most extensively documented outward-facing panel clusters. No further investigation was conducted. The log entry exists. The panel cluster exists. The correlation was not pursued. Canyon de Chelly sits in the northeastern corner of Arizona, within the boundaries of the Navajo Nation. It is one of the longest continuously inhabited landscapes in North America. People have lived in and around this canyon for close to 5,000 years. The red sandstone walls rise as high as 1,000 feet in places, and the ruins of ancient structures are visible in alcoves and overhangs throughout the canyon system. The National Park Service administers the monument in partnership with the Navajo Nation, an arrangement that reflects the fact that the land itself is Navajo land and has never been otherwise. The canyon contains a significant number of petroglyph and pictograph panels. Some of them are well documented in the academic literature. Others are known to Dene cultural knowledge keepers in ways that do not translate easily into the categories that academic documentation uses. Among Dene oral tradition, a specific subset of the canyon's marked panels is referred to by a term that has been translated into English. In various contexts as the speaking walls, the translation is functional, not poetic. It reflects the Dene understanding of what these panels do, not what they represent, and not what they meant to whoever made them, but what they are actively doing in the present tense. The instruction associated with the speaking walls is not what you might expect. It is not "do not look." Looking is not the concern. The concern is something more precise, the elder instruction, passed through Dene oral tradition and documented in multiple research contexts, states that anyone who traces the outline of certain figures on these panels with their finger, physical contact, the specific act of tracing, has done something. Not broken a rule. Done something, invited something. The instruction uses language that implies consequence rather than prohibition. It does not say you will be punished. It says something will follow you home. The distinction is important. A prohibition implies an external authority enforcing a rule. What the Dene tradition describes is more like physics. If you complete a circuit, current flows. If you trace the outline of certain figures with your finger, something that was not following you begins to follow you. In 2003, a documentation team from the University of Arizona conducted a photographic survey of petroglyph panels in Canyon de Chelly as part of a federally funded preservation project. The team consisted of 7 researchers. The project produced a substantial archive of images and data that has been cited in subsequent preservation work. The published report of that project contains a footnote. It is not emphasized. It appears in the methods section, in the context of explaining a gap in the panel documentation for a specific portion of the canyon. The footnote states that 2 members of the research team declined to re-enter the canyon after the 3rd day of fieldwork and would not provide a stated reason for this refusal. The documentation of the affected panels was therefore completed by the remaining team members on a subsequent date. The report does not return to this. The footnote does not appear in the summary. The 2 researchers are not named. No follow-up is recorded. The panels they declined to document are identified by their GPS coordinates in the project archive. Those coordinates place them within the section of the canyon that Dene cultural liaisons, in a separate consultation that took place during the same project period, identified as containing speaking walls. This is recorded. Both things are recorded. They have never been discussed together in any published context. 3 nations, no shared language. No established record of cultural contact across the periods when these traditions were formed. 3 distinct geographic regions separated by hundreds of miles. The Chumash people have lived along the California coast and in the interior valleys for more than 13,000 years. Their pictograph sites, painted images rather than carved petroglyphs, are concentrated in the mountains of the transverse ranges, in locations that were ceremonially significant to Chumash religious specialists known as the Antap. The most elaborately painted of these sites is Painted Cave, a sandstone overhang in the Santa Ynez Mountains north of Santa Barbara. Its ceiling is covered in polychrome designs of extraordinary complexity, painted with pigments that have survived for an estimated 1,000 years or more. The Shoshone people of the Great Basin have lived across what is now Nevada, Idaho, Utah, and surrounding states for thousands of years. Their rock art traditions include both petroglyphs and pictographs, and significant sites are distributed across the basin, including the extensively studied panels at Grimes Point, Nevada, east of Fallon in Churchill County. Grimes Point contains one of the densest concentrations of petroglyphs in the western United States, with hundreds of images pecked into basalt boulders across a volcanic landscape that was once the shore of a Pleistocene lake. The Anishinaabe peoples, a collective that includes the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations, have inhabited the Great Lakes region for thousands of years. Their pictograph tradition is distinct from the rock art of the Southwest and the Great Basin, concentrated on the smooth faces of Canadian shield rock outcroppings at lakeside locations. The Hegman Lake pictographs in northeastern Minnesota, within the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness, are among the most visited of these sites. 3 traditions, 3 regions. No shared language family, no documented historical contact. All 3 carry a warning about the same category of image. The images in question, across all 3 traditions, are described as those that appear during one visit and cannot be located in the same position on a return visit. The description in each tradition is consistent in its specific details. The image is not eroded. It is not damaged. It is not obscured by weather or vegetation. It is simply not where it was, not anywhere on the panel, not on adjacent boulders, not nearby. Gone. The Chumash tradition identifies these images as those made by the Antap specialists under specific ceremonial conditions, images that were not intended to be permanent records, but were understood as beings that could move through the world of rock. The Shoshone tradition uses language that the anthropologist Catherine Fowler documented in field work conducted in the 1970s and 1980s as describing certain images as not yet finished, meaning that the image was understood to be in a process of becoming rather than a completed fixed record. The Anishinaabe tradition, documented in detail by the Ojibwe scholar Basil Johnston, describes certain pictographs at lakeside sites as Manadug, spirit presences, that could withdraw from human perception when they chose to. 3 different languages, 3 different theological frameworks, 3 different geographical and ecological contexts, one conclusion stated consistently. If you saw one of these images on a visit to a site, you saw it because it was looking at you. And it has not ceased looking. On a summer morning in 2011, 4 visitors arrived at Boca Negra Canyon, one of the main trail systems within Petroglyph National Monument in Albuquerque, New Mexico. This is the same monument described at the opening of this account, the same dark basalt, the same paved parking lot, the same trail system, the same families with sunscreen and laminated maps. The 4 visitors were not researchers. They were not engaged in any formal project. They were tourists who had come to see the petroglyphs, as close to 200,000 people do each year. They walked the trail, they photographed the panels. At one point, at a specific boulder that the trail passes at close range, all 4 of them stopped and looked at a particular image on the panel face. The image, as all 4 of them later described it independently, was a human-like figure with both arms raised above its head. The figure was clearly visible. The figure was distinctive. All 4 of them remember it. When the photographs from that visit were reviewed later that day, the figure was not there. This is not a matter of lighting conditions or photographic exposure. The photographs of that boulder, and there were several, taken from different angles and distances, show the panel face clearly. The other images on the panel are present and clearly resolved. The raised arm figure does not appear in any of the photographs of that boulder. It is not partially visible. It is not shadowed. The space it occupied in memory is occupied in the photographs by a section of bare rock. The figure with raised arms does appear in one photograph from that visit. It appears on a different boulder. A boulder that none of the four visitors recall approaching or photographing intentionally. The camera's metadata, the embedded timestamp and sequence data, confirms that this photograph was taken between two photographs of a completely different section of the trail. The four visitors, reviewing the images, could not account for when or why the photograph was taken. None of them remembered raising the camera toward that boulder. The Albuquerque Journal published a brief account of this incident in its local news section in the fall of 2011. The story ran without significant follow-up. The visitors were named in the original article but have not commented publicly since, following the story's publication. A reporter contacted the Pueblo of Laguna Cultural Preservation Office for comment. The Pueblo of Laguna Cultural Preservation Office declined to discuss the specifics of the incident. Their written response to the reporter, a response that was included in a follow-up note to the original article, stated that the site had been the subject of prior concern. They did not specify what the concern was. They did not specify when it had been raised. They did not specify with whom they had raised it. The written response exists. The phrase "the subject of prior concern" appears in it. No additional information has been made public. In 2016, the Pueblo of Isleta submitted formal written comments to the National Park Service regarding access protocols at Petroglyph National Monument. The submission used specific language. It did not argue for the closure of trails on grounds of cultural sensitivity, which is the argument that federal agencies are most accustomed to receiving and evaluating from tribal nations. It did not argue for the restriction of photography on preservation grounds, which is the second most common argument, and one that the NPS has established procedures for considering. It argued for restricted access to specific panels on grounds of active spiritual hazard. That phrase, active spiritual hazard, appears in the written submission. It is not metaphorical language. It is the language of a formal government-to-government communication, reviewed by legal counsel before submission, submitted through the established federal consultation process, and placed in the public record. The Pueblo of Laguna submitted a separate set of comments in 2017, using substantially similar language, regarding a different cluster of panels at the same monument. The Hopi tribe, whose traditional territory lies approximately 200 miles to the northwest, but who maintain cultural and spiritual relationships with petroglyph sites across the broader region, submitted comments in 2018, 3 formal submissions, 3 separate Pueblo and tribal nations, all using language that explicitly distinguished their concern from preservation-based arguments, all placing the language of active hazard in the federal record. The NPS acknowledged receipt of all 3 submissions in writing, as required by law. None of the restrictions requested have been implemented. The trails at Petroglyph National Monument remain open. The specific panels named in 2 of the 3 submissions. The 3rd submission did not name panels by location, citing concern about publicizing their coordinates, are accessible to any visitor who walks the standard trail routes. No additional signage has been posted near those panels. The laminated trail maps do not reference the submissions. At the Heard Museum in Phoenix, Arizona, in November 2018, a panel discussion on federal and tribal consultation was recorded and made publicly available in the museum's digital archive. One of the panelists was a Hopi cultural liaison who had been involved in drafting the 2018 submission to the NPS. Near the end of the discussion, responding to a question about what outcome the tribal submission was seeking, the liaison said this: "The elders are not asking for protection of the site. They are asking for protection of the people visiting it." He paused before continuing. He said that distinction was important. He said he wanted to be clear about it, because in his experience, federal agencies tended to hear tribal concerns as concerns about the land, about preservation, about sacred designation, about cultural ownership. He said that was not what this was. The land, he said, does not need protecting. The recording is in the Heard Museum archive. It can be accessed by request. That portion of the discussion has never been cited in any federal consultation response, in any NPS policy document, or in any of the public communications the monument has issued regarding its management of the site. The parking lot off Unser Boulevard is still there. The fee schedule is still posted. The restroom facilities are still maintained on a Tuesday afternoon in the summer. The trail at Boca Negra Canyon is busy enough that you are never more than a few minutes from another family, another set of voices, another child running ahead while a parent calls after them to slow down. The basalt is dark. The carved images in it are visible from close range. Some of them face the trail, some of them face the canyon floor, and some of them, in positions you would pass within arm's reach of as you walk the standard route, face outward in a way that the Ute elders who study panels like these would recognize immediately, and name, and back away from. You would not know which ones. There is no sign. There is no marking on the trail map. The ranger at the trailhead will answer your questions about the ancestral Pueblo people, and about volcanic geology, and about the best time of day for photographs. 3 tribal nations have told the federal government, in formal written submissions, that certain visitors to this site need to be protected, not the site. The visitors. That word, the visitors, refers to people who are there right now. People who drove in from the suburbs on a weekend morning. People who applied sunscreen in the parking lot. The Tiwa-speaking elders have been specific about what actions open what the markings close. A finger tracing an outline. A photograph taken of the wrong panel. An approach after dark. The specificity is the warning. They were precise because the thing they are describing is precise. The trail is rated easy. The round trip takes under an hour. The parking lot will be full again by 9 o'clock Saturday morning, and somewhere along that trail, on a boulder you will pass close enough to touch, something has been locked in place for longer than the United States has existed as a nation. The lock is still there. That is not in dispute. 3 nations said so in writing, in federal filings, using the language of active hazard. And no one has disputed the characterization. They only left the trail open.